Friends, as we look at our lectionary passages today, we examine Mark's Gospel, Mark chapter 5, 21 to 43. And we find two interwoven healing stories, the healing of a woman who's been bleeding for 12 years and the raising of Jairus' 12-year-old daughter. It's important to remember that Mark's Gospel is set against the backdrop of Roman-occupied Palestine, where social hierarchies and purity laws deeply influenced daily life. The society was stratified by gender, health status, and religious purity, creating distinctions and boundaries between those who are clean and unclean, between the powerful and the powerless. In telling the stories of these two healings, the writer of Mark's Gospel sandwiches one story within the other. And so he highlights the connection between the two stories and these two women. There's a solidarity between them. Jairus is, on the other hand, a synagogue leader or ruler. And he represents the established religious authority. He's one of those who metaphorically sits on top of the pile in a heavily patriarchal society that was probably quite similar in many ways to the patriarchal culture of the Taliban in Afghanistan today. On the other hand, the hemorrhaging woman epitomizes the marginalized and the excluded. Because she is powerless, a powerless woman living in a male-dominated world, made even worse due to her continuous bleeding, which would have made her ritually unclean. The woman's condition has lasted 12 years, and it parallels, as I've said, Jairus' daughter's age, which on the one hand underscores firstly the length and the depth of the woman's suffering. According to the laws of Leviticus, her condition made her perpetually unclean, isolating her from society. And she had spent all her resources on physicians without finding a cure, leaving her in economic desperation. Now, by touching Jesus' cloak, she transgresses the social and the religious boundaries of her culture. She breaks the rules of what was right and proper, both culturally and religiously. And so her act of faith is both bold and desperate. Jesus responds saying, "Daughter, your faith has made you well. Go in peace. Be healed of your disease." Not only does he heal her physically, but he also restores her social identity. By calling her daughter, Jesus publicly acknowledges her worth and reintegrates her into community. And so Jesus directly challenges the oppressive purity system based on the Bible that had marginalized her. Jairus, on the other hand, as we already noted, is a figure of authority. And yet in the story, we find him humbling himself before Jesus. His daughter, at 12 years old, stands on the cusp of womanhood. In fact, she is officially of marriageable age, which for anyone living in the Western world today seems almost inconceivable to imagine. Can you imagine your 12-year-old daughter or niece or granddaughter being married off at 12 years of age to a man probably at least 10 years older than her? It's just unthinkable. We would regard it as child abuse. What must this have been like for these young girls? It must, I think, have felt for most of them like a death sentence. This is the patriarchal culture which this young girl has grown up in. But she is deeply loved by her father. He is desperate, a desperate father who humbles himself before Jesus, probably as a last resort. But Jesus' journey to Jairus' house is interrupted by the healing of the hemorrhaging woman. Now, within the culture of the day, as Jesus responds to a man of authority, this is a rude interruption by a nobody. The writer of Mark's Gospel seems to be deliberately juxtaposing not just the difference in social status between this unclean, marginalized woman and the synagogue ruler, but also juxtaposing their faith. They both come to Jesus out of desperation. Desperation is the great leveler. When news arrives that Jairus' daughter has died, Jesus' statement, "Do not fear, only believe," emphasizes a recurring theme in Mark's Gospel of faith over fear. The raising of Jairus' daughter helps to emphasize the sense of Jesus as the Lord of life. And the mission of Jesus in Mark's Gospel is to raise people up from their places of death. But it also underscores his challenge to societal norms by touching the dead girl. Jesus again defies purity laws, just like the hemorrhaging woman did. This time from Numbers 19, verse 11. His command, Talitha kum, meaning little girl, get up, is one of those tender and beautiful moments in the Gospels, intimate and compassionate, that reveal Jesus's personal concern and love, a tenderness, and underscores the value that he sees in this little girl before him. Ched Myers, in his book Binding the Strong Man, interprets these stories as a critique of the socio-political structures of the time. Jesus' actions subvert the existing order, firstly by prioritizing compassion over ritual cleanliness. Jesus reveals he's not a biblical fundamentalist. He ignores two very clear biblical laws in order to act on the side of life and compassion. Those are values that transcend the letters of the law in the Bible. Wholeness and compassion are more important to Jesus than the rules of the Bible. Secondly, Jesus is not swayed by the social standing of the synagogue ruler. He allows himself to be interrupted by a woman of low standing, and in effect makes Jairus wait. His willingness to be interrupted by this marginalized woman of low standing emphasizes that Jesus sees her as having equal dignity with Jairus. It suggests that when God's kingdom, God's reign begins to happen in our hearts, we begin to see with new eyes. And we no longer distinguish between important people and unimportant people. Paul says in one of his letters to the Corinthians, and now we no longer view people from a worldly perspective. All become seen through the eyes of divine love as having equal value and equal dignity. And so the story suggests that the way of Jesus, that the Spirit of Jesus begins to change the way society is ordered and structured. It begins to change the value we begin to give different people in society. And then lastly, the significance of 12 in the story shouldn't be overlooked. The number 12 in the Bible represents the 12 tribes of Israel. And by highlighting the fact that the hemorrhaging woman has been suffering for 12 years and that this little girl is 12 years old, some commentators suggest that it is highlighting that all is not well within the nation of Israel, certainly as it relates to women. It is a culture in Jesus' day in which women bleed metaphorically and little girls experience a death in their spirits. Jesus, on the other hand, is creating a new Israel, where women no longer need to bleed and their dignity is restored. and where little girls are raised up to new life and new hope. I end with two words, or words from two of our other lectionary passages today that speak of the new life and the new hope that life lived in God in the kingdom way of Jesus brings. Psalm 30, verse 11. You turn my mourning into dancing. You remove my sackcloth and clothe me with joy. And then Lamentations 3:22 to 23. The steadfast love of God never ceases. God's mercies never come to an end. They are new every morning. Great is your faithfulness. Amen. May God bless you as you think more deeply on these things. Amen.